Bismillahir-Rahman-Nir-Rahim. The status of Hadeeth in Islam.
Through the Quranic and historical perspective.
How were Ahadith compiled? How did these Ahadith reach us? What is their status in Deen? What is the mutual relationship of the Quran and Ahadith?
Ghulam Ahmad Parwez.
Muhammad Aslam Jairajpuri.
7. The status of Ahadith according to some famous
Ahel Fikero Ilm. Intellectuals.
What the status of Ahadith is according to Allama Iqbal has been discussed previously in Chapter 1.
This reality was also made clear at that point. According to the statement of Allama Iqbal.
As to what the doctrine of Imam Abu Hanifa and Shah Wali-ullah was.
Regarding this, the ideas of a few other intellectual scholars are presented next.
7.1 Maulana Obaidullah Sindhi.
The name of Shah Wali-ullah Muhaddis Delvi requires no introduction. Maulana Obaidullah Sindhi was considered a great jurist, thinker and orator. Around 1941, he contributed an article to Wali-ullah Number, wherein he explained the right place of Ahadith according to his understanding of divine wisdom.
We note down selected excerpts from this article as follows.
In this respect, regarding the issue of the correct status of Ahadith, you have seen in the preceding pages that there are two types of Ahadith. One that relates to the circumstances prevalent during the lifetime of Rasulullah, and the second in which orders have been given. As far as acting on Deen is concerned, it is obvious that the latter part is very important. Because it is said that just as the Quranic commands are immutable, likewise these orders of Ahadith are also immutable and should be acted upon in the same way for eternity.
Let us see what Obaidullah Sindhi says in this regard.
He writes, "Let it be clear that when implementation of fundamental laws begins, then certain explanatory laws are devised according to the state of the population.
The difference is that the fundamental laws are immutable whereas explanatory laws can change according to need.
We call these explanatory laws Sunnah, which Rasulullah and after him 3 caliphs devised in mutual consultation with the central organization of Muslims.
After the Uthmaniyya Caliphate this system disappeared i.e.
all tasks should be decided following mutual consultation. The Hanafi jurists acknowledge Sunnah as a common point of agreement between Rasulullah and the 4 caliphs, and this is our opinion as well.
And this Sunnah will emerge from the Quran itself, which in today's terminology is called bylaws. The original fundamental laws are fixed and defined as a matter of principle. While bylaws of that period were different and now they will be different and changes will be made according to the requirements of the changing times.
New rules will be formed and this is what is called fiqh.
This means that for the establishment of the divine system the explanatory laws, bylaws,
formed by Rasulullah and the 4 caliphs in the light of the Quran is what is known as Sunnah. In other words, fiqh of their time. These bylaws will keep on changing in every era, but the actual laws, the Quran, will remain unchanged as a fundamental source.
7.2 Status of Ahadith is the same as that of the
Bible. The Quran has declared the previous books of revelation as being tampered with i.e.
because those books are not in the original form in which the messengers of Allah gave them to each of their ummahs.
It is known about the existing Bible that his disciples compiled it after Jesus.
Maulana Sindhi states that the status of the books of Ahadith is similar to the Bible. It is now obvious that if we cannot declare the Bible as being the true words of Jesus, then how can we declare with surety that Ahadith are the sayings of Rasulullah? Maulana Sindhi writes,
if, according to the terminology of these people, we equate the previous divine books with the books of Ahadith of those days, then according to the rules set earlier, these cannot be considered authentic.
If these people acknowledge this fact, then all issues will be resolved. In our books on Ahadith there is unanimous opinion that they contain incorrect narrations.
Also in these books of Ahadith the same events have been narrated in different ways. In many of our books on Ahadith the writers have kept on making mistakes which the research scholars keep correcting. After this, if we place all the 4 Bibles side by side with our 4 books of Ahadith, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, Tirmizi, we will find barely any difference.
This revelation as a whole has been confined within the Quran and not anywhere outside of this.
Then in the same way that the disciples of Jesus compiled his Sirat in which his sayings and deeds were collected through their individual efforts,
the Muslim Imams of history and narratives also wrote about the Sirat and history of Rasulullah and his time.
Books based on the history and Sirat of Rasulullah which are based on such narratives are called books of Ahadith. These are neither revelations nor revelation protected like the Quran and are therefore not authentic, like the Bible is not authentic. In the margins of Obaidullah Sindhi's Persian article, there are notes written by Shah Sahib whose translation is as follows. For the divine book, there are 2 prerequisites. First, the angelic bounties and the pleasure of Allah for each individual who recites the book and strives to publicize it. And second, the book remaining intact after a long time has passed and possession of the ability by the Ummah to memorize it.
If these 2 conditions are not fulfilled, then it will not be a book of Allah.
Rather it will be authored by some man among mankind who gathered this knowledge about the Messenger, like Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim in our deen.
In the words of Maulana Sindhi, p. 265,
the collection of Sirat of the Messengers in this way was in vogue even in earlier times. Therefore books on Ahadith are in fact history books, and in history books all sorts of narrations are quoted. 7.3 Inclusion of wrong narratives in Sahih Sita.
Maulana Sindhi states,
when I saw this subject in Muqaddama Mushkat by Sheikh Abdul Haq Mahadeeth Delvi, who died in 1052 A.H., that there are about 50 books on Ahadith in which correct and incorrect Ahadith have been collected and Sheikh Sahib has placed them all on a par with each other and he accepts wrong narrations in Sahih Sita in the same way as in other books, I felt extremely worried. 7.4 How unauthentic narratives end up being considered mutawatir. While referring to various kinds of books, Maulana Sindhi says,
besides these books, other books have been authored by such muhaddisin whose intellectual credibility is not recognized.
Muhaddisan of later years have collected the narrations of these untrustworthy books and given them the name Zawaid, because of which the door opened for conflict in the knowledge of Ahadith. In this pile there are more than enough narrations which are called weak by second-tier scholars. And according to the writers, by reaching these tiers, i.e., 3rd, 4th and 5th,
the Ahadith become mutawatir.
After this, Maulana Sindhi giving an example of a Hadeeth, writes, Tirmizi termed this Hadeeth as weak.
Now see what Mustadrak Hakim does.
He narrates this saying using 30 to 40 certifications.
A scholar who is a non-researcher, becoming impressed by the abundance of its certifications, becomes ready to accept it as being mutawatir, based on its fame and content.
With the help of Fatah al-Bari, we investigated these narrations by Hakim, and did not find a single certification to be correct.
7.5 Weak narratives of Sahih Bukhari.
After this Maulana Sindhi writes, small errors continued to be committed by every writer, even by Imam Bukhari, who is held to be the most credible. Hafiz ibn Hajar believes that there are about 40 ahadith in Bukhari's book whose certifications are weak, and Hafiz Hajar also has no solution to this problem. In the side notes on page 276, though he took out nearly 100 narrations from Sahih Bukhari and then also explained his reservations, There are about 40 attributions that are so weak that according to Hafiz ibn Hajar he could provide no justification for these. 7.6 Criteria for authentic and weak ahadith.
The group who is Mutashaddad fil Hadeeth intensely believes that the ahadith which are now present in existing compilations are final and irrevocable. These cannot be subjected to any criticism whatsoever.
Those which have been labeled authentic are authentic, and those which have been declared as weak are weak, i.e. these have to be accepted just as they were by our forefathers.
By using our own intellect and reasoning in the light of the Quran, we cannot do anything.
Maulana Sindhi further says, this error of judgment which shrouds ordinary minds in the bottom of which this disease is hidden,
is based on what has already been done regarding the art of ahadith, particularly in declaring them to be correct or weak.
Such a scholar, who using his intellect considers correct ahadith as being correct, cannot be born today.
Using, as mayor rijal the difference of certification and rejection. Then difference of opinion in the definition of a correct hadith does not allow a student power to develop any unity of thought.
And finally, after being left with no choice, the student resorts to finding out a solution according to whatever maslak he follows. This way, after obtaining the ability to differentiate a hadith that is in line with his maslak, he views it as authentic, and if against, then considers it as weak, and thus the student ends his journey.
After this he becomes the sole custodian and possessor of all knowledge about deen, and whomever he wishes he declares as a Muslim, and
whoever he wishes he declares to be a kafir. 7.7 Some ahadith from Sahih Bukhari. As is known, there are certain such narratives in our books on ahadith which send shivers through our spine when they are attributed to Rasulullah. See what Maulana Sindhi says in this respect. The more my attention increased towards the Quran, and the more it became difficult to make young students understand some ahadith of Bukhari, the greater became my hesitation in my previous belief. I have never been convinced that if education about deen is given to students of Arabic madras it would be satisfactory. But if the same education is given to college students, it would be unsatisfactory. If such is the case, then that education cannot be that of true Islam, because the Quran is revealed for the whole of mankind. If we cannot educate college students on the pattern of Arabic schools, then what can we teach non-Muslims? As for my reservations about Bukhari and why I cannot teach this book to a new convert from Europe, I do not wish to go into these details in public. To those who have completed their education or are nearing completion, I will relate everything when sitting in discussion with them.
7.8 Maulana Hamiduddin Farahi and Syed Suleiman Nadvi.
Maulana Hamid ud Din was considered to be a great scholar of Quranic thought.
In his book, Nizam ul-Quran, he writes about ahadith.
Bear in mind that the majority of ahadith are weak and only a minority are correct. Hadith, consensus, and the writings of earlier authors are none of them free from doubt and conjecture. I have seen certain narrations which tear up the roots of the Quranic verses. Most of the Ala Hadith have accepted in their hearts that there is no iota of doubt in whatever has been narrated in Bukhari and Muslim. Therefore we write about some objectionable material so that you could understand that Allah has forbidden us to declare scholars as God. So we are not ready to believe in their illogical thoughts and expressions. An article was published by Allama Hamid ud Din Farahi and his student Maulvi Amin Hassan Islahi on the study of ahadith in the February 1942 issue of Mu'arrif. From Azamgarh, India. The editor of the magazine, Syed Suleiman Nadvi, did not write any dissenting note. This means that he too was in agreement with their thinking. Let us consider what they had written. The second thing is that Maulana does not agree with the opinion of these people who view all narrations of Bukhari and Muslim as beyond conjecture. And this is not some new or strange thing written by Maulana Hafiz ibn Hajar and Sheikh Abdul Haq Muhaddith Delvi also do not consider these two books to be free of conjecture. The only book free of conjecture under the heavens is the Quran. After this it is written, we should only accept those narrations which testify to and support the Quran. When there is a difference between the Quran and Hadeeth, the Quran will be the deciding authority. On page 90 it is written, here the Maulana has said that without doubt, doubt and conjecture are present in Ahadith, and this is such a thing which can hardly be denied by anyone.
So you can see that regarding doubt and conjecture within Ahadith, the matter is not limited to Allama Farahi,
Maulvi Amin Ahsan Islahi and Syed Suleiman Nadvi, but according to the statement of these scholars, this is such an established fact that hardly any can deny it. 7.9 Maulana Manazir Ahsan Gilani. Some excerpts from Tavan-e-Hadeeth by
Maulana Gilani have already been given.
With regard to Ahadith as the history of the period of Rasulullah and of his companions, he writes, if we only observe the name given to his book by the greatest Imam of the art of Ahadith, Hazrat Imam Bukhari, we can easily understand that whatever I have said is nothing new, rather those who understand have always seen this art with this view in mind. Imam Bukhari's book is today known as just Bukhari Sharif, though this is not the actual name of this book. He himself had in fact named it Al-Jamia al-Sahih al-Masnad al-Muqtaza min Amur-e Rasulullah wa Salam wa Ayyami Hai. In this the words Amur, matters, and Ayyam,
period,
are worthy of consideration.
As it is clear from these that the correct definition of Ahadith according to Bukhari encompasses all those matters which are related in some way or another to Rasulullah.
The word Ayyam has further broadened its definition, i.e., that which I have already said, that the art of Ahadith is in fact the history of that period in which a comprehensive personality like Rasulullah was given to humanity by Allah, and left an impact on the world for all times.
Leaving this behind,
and putting aside trivial matters,
if we keep in mind the criteria of recognizing the tree from its fruit,
then from a quick glance at the present pile of Ahadith even by an ordinary person, we can judge the true worth of Ahadith, and that its true definition is the same which Imam Bukhari has indicated by including it in the name of his book, as I have explained. In this it is clearly explained that according to Imam Bukhari himself and Maulana Gilani, Sahih Bukhari is in fact the history of the period of Rasulullah. And this is the status of other books on Ahadith.